Canon, huh? Hello. Let's talk about that new Canon camera. This video is for people who are potentially looking at purchasing an A7 III like I own and I'm shooting on right now, or maybe the EOS R. And we're going to be comparing the two and the specs that they have and why one is better than the other if you're shooting for video. Enjoy. So I originally shot Canon 2 years ago before I swapped over to Sony. I had a 60D for probably 5 or 6 years. It was my first DSLR that had manual focus. So it was a big deal for me and it got me into video a lot. And if the right Canon camera came along, I wouldn't be adverse to giving it a go and swapping back to a Canon mirrorless camera. Now the EOS R just launched. It's to be seen as a direct competitor to the A7 III and the Nikon Z camera, which I'm not even going to talk about. Specifically in this video, we're going to be talking about how the EOS R compares to the A7 III. So let's go over some of the highlights, mostly talking about video. A flippy screen. No more overexposed shots, no more out of frame shots. You can film yourself, vloggers rejoice. It's time to sell all my Sony stuff and get the EOS R. No, I'm just kidding. It's not happening because of my next couple of points. It is a full frame Canon mirrorless camera that shoots 4K. 23.98, 24, and 29.97 frames per second, I think. Exactly the same as the Sony A7 III. However, it shoots at a 1.7 times crop, kind of like a crop sensor. If you're wondering, well, why does that affect anything? Here are some tests as to why. If you want to shoot at a wide like this, which is now a 16, that 16 is no longer 16 because you're shooting at 1.7 times crop. That 16 now becomes this, which is pretty much a 27. That wide lens really isn't that wide anymore. Here's another one. If you're shooting at 24 like I am right here, 24 is a really cinematic look that people like to use, not for this kind of stuff, but for other things. 24 now becomes this, which is now a 40. So that 24 is now a 40mm and it's pretty tight. Okay, let's go back to the regular shot. So you get my point. You are going to be losing some of the full frame aspects of this camera. You are going to be losing some depth of field, and then with that, you're also going to lose some low light abilities of the full frame camera. People are going to want this because it's a full frame camera that shoots 4K, but then they're not going to want it because it shoots 4K at a 1.7 crop. So it's not actually really a full frame camera when you're shooting 4K video. I hope you get what I mean. It's not a good thing. The A7 III doesn't have this issue. If you want to shoot at 16, you get 16. If you want to shoot at 24, you get 24. It's a full frame camera that shoots 4K with no crop. It's a big deal. Sorry, that light's starting to get annoying. I'm going to change that. I'm shooting in front of a window in case you didn't really tell, and the sun's moving as I'm shooting, so I can deal with just that there. So the EOS R does shoot 1080p video at 60 frames a second as well. However, I can tell you that the Sony A7 III, as you probably know, does 120 frames a second. So 120 over 60, double the slow motion ability, much better for B-roll. Shooting slow motion, you're gonna be able to slow it down twice as much. A7 III wins there. Now that being said, you can shoot 120 frames per second on the EOS R at 720, which I don't know why they included, because honestly, who's gonna wanna use that? 720, no one uses that anymore. Just my opinion, but no one's going to want to use that Canon. Why bother? It uses Canon's popular dual pixel autofocus system, which some say is better than Sony's system. I think they're both great systems. I've seen a lot of reviews on both systems. They both seem to work very well. At this point, it's tomatoes, tomatoes. If they both work, great. It has C-Log, which if you're not sure what that is, it's basically Canon's version of a flat profile image that you can then grade later on. Sony has S-Log, Canon has C-Log. They included this in the EOS R. When you shoot at a flatter profile, you can then put it into post and you can color grade that footage a lot nicer. So Canon's C-Log is a welcome feature for the EOS R. The A7 III has S-Log, so you can grade both those. Here's something where the Canon wins. It has 10-bit color, which is a really, really welcome feature. I wish the Sony A7 III had this as well. In a nutshell, it captures a lot more levels of color. The EOS R will capture 1024 levels of color, and the A7 III catches 256. So that's 8-bit versus 10-bit. Why do you need that? Again, it's really good for grading your video. When you shoot at 10-bit, you're gonna be capturing a lot more color information. Because of that color information, you can then go and grade it a lot easier. You can get much better results. Definitely a win for the EOS R. Also, and I know people are gonna say it, it has Canon's color science. Yes, of course it does. It's a Canon camera. So if you're into that and you really like Canon's color science, then that's a good thing. I don't have a problem with Sony, so I don't really care. All right, here's another bad one for the EOS R. It does not have IBIS. Now, if you're wondering what IBIS is, basically in the camera, this is an A6300, but just to show as a demo, in the camera, Sony A7 III has IBIS built in. The sensor inside the camera there, it moves around. But when you move the camera a little bit, or if you're shooting handheld, it compensates by moving the sensor around. You can get that on lenses as well, but when you have it on a lens and on the camera, combined, they work really, really well together and they can smooth out your video. The EOS R does not have IBIS built into the camera. You can still get it on the lenses, but inside the camera is what you want. So vloggers who are shooting themselves out here and the camera's kind of shaking around as they're walking, they're really gonna want IBIS. So I don't know why Canon opted to not include it in there. I'm sure there's a reason for it. We'll probably never find out why, but in my opinion, they should have included it if they could, because it really is a useful feature that a lot of people use. If you want to see an example of a really good camera that has amazing IBIS, look at the Panasonic GH5, look at some tests with the IBIS. That thing's incredible. You can be shaking it around and it's completely buttery smooth. So GH5 is a really good camera that has amazing IBIS. The A7 III's is good, not as good as the GH5 though. Not really video related, but the Canon EOS R does shoot at 30.3 megapixels versus the Sony A7 III at 24. If you care about that, and the reason I say that is because megapixels are not an indication of picture quality, it's purely the size at which you can blow those images up. If you want to crop your image as well, having more megapixels will always help, but megapixels aren't an indication of quality. So Canon has a new lens system. The lenses actually look really nice. They're big, they're bulky, they're very Canon-like. They're big and round and flush. The Sony lenses kind of had some weird shapes sometimes, but the new Canon lenses look really nice. Some of them do look quite expensive, and not all of them are going to launch at the same time the camera does come out, so that's something to bear in mind too. However, that being said, Canon is going to come out with a mount or an adapter that you can just put to the EOS R and then use your old lenses. So if you have Canon L lenses or something like that, you can use those too. That's a good move, Canon. I like that. The cost. So the A7 III costs $1,999. This is US. And then the Canon EOS R costs $2,299. Those are body only, very similar price cameras. They're competing with each other, so it makes sense for Canon to launch it around that same price. A smart choice by Canon. So on initial impressions, the EOS R, it does look like a good camera, and then you start to dig deep into some of the specs and you realize it doesn't have everything that, in my case, I would need. The A7 III has everything and it's still a perfect camera for that. The EOS R does not have those features. If you're like me and you're using this primarily for video, that 4K crop is gonna be just a killer. You can't use that. You want the full frame aspect of a camera and you're not getting it. 120 frames per second at 720, I need 1080 at least, so that's a no-go for me. And that IBIS, it's extremely useful if you do want to go handheld sometimes. Not having it, I don't know, Canon, you should have just included it. Why not? Just include it if you can. Delay it another month, you should have included it. This video was not intended to bash the EOS R in any way. It was a genuine comparison looking at the specs of both cameras just to show the difference between the A7 III and the EOS R. If you were looking for a new camera and you're weighing up either of those two options, this video was intended for you. I really was hoping for Canon to bring out something that could compete with the A7 III. Competition is really good, it does drive innovation, and I wouldn't have minded trying out the EOS R as well, but doesn't have enough for me, so I'm not going to be going for it. Canon is on the right track with this, they really are, but they're not quite there yet. Maybe next year, by which point we'll probably have the A7S III and the rumored new Panasonic full frame camera, which will probably destroy this camera too. So until then, I guess I'll continue to use the A7 III, and if you're shooting video like myself, I would recommend the A7 III over the EOS R 100%. All right, thanks for watching today. I hope this video was useful to you. If you did like it, if you did find it helpful, just hit that little like button down below. If you're not part of my channel already, consider subscribing if you would be so kind, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.